When my car pulled into the driveway, the world felt tilted on its axis. My parking space was empty. The heavy brass nameplate I'd commissioned myself, the one that read Evelyn, was gone from the gatepost, leaving two stark, accusing holes where it had been drilled in. My mother stood on the porch. Her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. My sister, Chloe, leaned against a gleaming new white car, adopting a posture of such absolute ownership, it was as if she owned the very sun hanging in the sky. "You're back early," my mother said. I looked past them, toward the house. The curtains are different. Chloe finally pushed herself off the car, a triumphant grin spreading across her face as she dangled a set of keys from a diamond-studded chain. "Bad news?" "Genius," she said, her voice a cruel sing-song taunt. "You don't live here anymore." I didn't answer. I just looked around quietly, absorbing the wrongness of it all. The rose bushes Dad planted were gone, replaced by sterile white gravel. The welcome mat I'd bought last Christmas, the one that said, "Home Sweet Home," was gone. They laughed. A harsh, rehearsed sound, like a joke that had been waiting far too long to be told. My mother's smirk was the final confirmation. "We sold the house," she announced, her tone dripping with false regret. "We needed the money to pay your sister's debts." She gestured vaguely towards Chloe, who was now admiring her manicure as if the fate of a universe rested on its perfection. $214,000. To be exact. "You were gone for too long." Evelyn. They were expecting a performance. They had prepared for shouting, pleading, maybe even tears. They had imagined me collapsing into a heap on the pavement, a dramatic climax to their little play. They had not prepared for this silence. My quiet stillness began to fill the space between us. A heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered their victory. I could see the confusion bloom in my mother's eyes, the way Chloe's triumphant smirk began to falter, twitching at the corners. They were armed for a fight, but I had refused to pick up a weapon. This unnerved them more than any screaming match ever could. When I finally looked up from studying the cracks in the driveway, my expression wasn't one of defeat. It wasn't sadness or anger. It was one of cold, detached assessment. I let a smile touch my lips. It was a predator's smile, slow and completely devoid of warmth, the kind that promises not a fight, but an ending. Chloe took an involuntary step back, bumping into the fender of her new car. "When did you finalize the sale?" My voice was calm. My question, not a plea, but an interrogation. Each word was perfectly level, stripped of all emotion. My mother, regaining a sliver of her theatrical confidence, puffed out her chest. "Last week, got a good price. 2. Cash in hand. The buyer's name was, well, he was a very motivated gentleman." "I know," I interrupted, my smile widening, just a fraction. "I recommended him." Their laughter froze on their faces, turning brittle in the afternoon air. Chloe's mouth hung open slightly. My mother's carefully constructed expression of smug pity dissolved into blank confusion. The power dynamic of the entire universe, which they thought they had so cleverly rewritten, had just snapped back into its original alignment with 3 simple words. The chill had started 6 months ago. The last time we had a family dinner, in an opulent restaurant I paid for, with money I didn't really have, trying to hold together the crumbling facade of our family. I remember the scene in excruciating detail, the crisp, white tablecloths, the clinking of expensive silverware, and Chloe, in a brand new designer dress, weeping theatrically into a $20 cocktail. She spun a familiar tale of woe, bad investments, bad men, a string of terrible decisions that were always, somehow, someone else's fault. He promised me it was a sure thing. She sobbed, dabbing at her dry eyes with a napkin. He said my portfolio would double in a month. How was I supposed to know he was a con artist? My mother reached across the table, patting Chloe's hand with a practiced, gentle rhythm. You're a victim. My poor girl. You just trust too easily. She then shot me a look, a silent reprimand for my stoic silence, for my refusal to join in this tired chorus. Evelyn doesn't understand. She's always been cold, practical to a fault. But I wasn't cold. I was waking up. I looked at my weeping sister and my enabling mother, and I had an epiphany. It wasn't a lightning bolt, but a slow, creeping realization that settled deep in my bones, like a terminal diagnosis. Love doesn't just blind you. If it's the wrong kind of love, it rots you from the inside out. It turns you into a willing host for a parasite. You keep giving pieces of yourself away, your money, your time, your sanity, believing you're healing them, when in reality, you're just feeding an insatiable hunger. You're letting them consume you piece by agonizing piece. That night, my mind flashed back to the $40,000 credit card bill of Chloe's I had just paid off. A debt she'd racked up on a spiritual retreat to Bali that seemed to involve more champagne and shopping than enlightenment. I remembered the endless phone calls, the panicked excuses, the tearful promises that this was the last time that she had learned her lesson. And as I sat there, listening to the next verse of the same old song, a quiet, resolute vow formed in my mind. This was it. This was the absolute last time. The emotional bond didn't just fray that night. I took a pair of shears and severed it completely. The first tremor came a month later. I was working late, reviewing quarterly reports for my development firm, when a strange alert popped up. It was a credit inquiry notification, one I hadn't initiated. Then, I noticed strange activity in my digital property records, access logs from unfamiliar IP addresses, all originating from a public library 2 towns over, bank inquiries under my mother's name popping up, where they shouldn't be. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, a phantom limb of anxiety from my decision to emotionally detach. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was a cold knot in my stomach. I started digging, working late into the night. My home office, lit only by the glow of my monitor. I became a paranoid detective in my own life, cross-referencing documents, tracking digital footprints, following a trail of breadcrumbs. They were too arrogant and technically inept to even realize they were leaving. The moment of chilling clarity came when I found an unsigned letter from my lawyer, buried deep in a digital spam folder I never checked. It was a draft, a query about a power of attorney, filed under my name, with a scanned signature that was a near-perfect forgery of my own. They must have practiced it for weeks. That's when the warmth truly left me. It wasn't a dramatic shattering, but a slow, siled, leaching, like a body succumbing to hypothermia. The person they thought of as their daughter, their sister, the endless well of forgiveness and funds, was gone. In her place was an observer, a strategist. I didn't confront them. Confrontation was their arena. They thrived on emotional chaos. on tears and accusations and guilt-tripping. My arena was silence and information. I stopped being a participant in the family drama and became its sole, dispassionate audience. I installed trackers on their phones, a simple app hidden under the guise of a system update. I had listening devices discreetly planted in their favorite booth at the cafe where they met every Tuesday to complain about me over lattes. The snippets of conversation I gathered were both heartbreaking and clarifying. She'll get over it. She always does. A little crying. A little guilt. And she'll be paying for my new car in no time. Asterisk. That was my mother. Her voice smug. Asterisk. She's so wrapped up in her work. She won't even notice until it's done. She's always been weak like that. All that success has made her soft. Asterisk. That was Chloe. The contempt dripping from every word. They painted a picture of me as a fragile, naive workaholic they could easily manipulate. And I let them believe in the fiction they had created because it made them careless. That's the thing about family who take you for granted. Once they think you'll always forgive them, they stop bothering to hide their knives. And I was watching every single blade they unsheathed, cataloging every cut, every betrayal. I let them walk right into the trap because I was the one who built it. I listened to their whispers. I watched their plans unfold. And I moved my own pieces on the board with silent, meticulous precision. My response was not emotional. It was architectural. You see, I began my tone now, calm and pedagogical, as if explaining a simple math problem to a pair of struggling students. The trap had 3 parts. You should really take notes. Chloe scoffed, but the sound was thin, fragile. My mother just stared, her face a mask of dawning dread. First, I said, holding up one finger, the true legal deed to this house, the ground we are standing on. The foundation my father laid brick by brick was transferred to my anonymous holding company 2 years ago. I did it as a simple asset protection measure. Long before you ever hatched your little scheme, the house was insulated from you, from your debts, from your greed, from the very beginning. Second, I continued, raising a second finger, when I discovered your forged power of attorney. I didn't stop it. I didn't call the lawyer. I let it proceed. Why? Because the documents you created, the ones you thought gave you ultimate control, only granted you access to a decoy title. It was a ghost. A legal fiction I had created specifically for this purpose. At this point, I physically anchored the explanation for them, pointing a single, steady finger. You see that fence? The one separating my lawn from the empty, weed-choked plot of land next door. They both turned to look, their faces blank with confusion. That's what you sold, an empty lot, to a company that I own. And third, I said, my voice dropping, each word landing like a hammer blow. I laid out my intent with chilling finality. I needed you to go through every single step of your plan. I needed you to believe you were winning. I needed you to take the money. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. I wanted the paper trail. I began listing the documented crimes, counting them off on my fingers. Forged authorization, fraudulent sale of a non-existent asset, wire fraud, tax evasion on the income you received. It's all there. Documented, notarized, and filed with the relevant authorities. Chloe's defiance was a fragile thing, and it shattered with a short, nervous laugh. You're bluffing, she spat. though her eyes darted nervously toward my mother, for reassurance she wouldn't find. You wouldn't do that to us. You don't have it in you. You're too nice. That was my cue. That was the word that sealed their fate. Asterisk. Nice asterisk. I slowly reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a folded set of documents. The paper was crisp. The official seal of my development firm, Precision Holdings, embossed in the corner. I didn't have to say a word. I just held it out. Chloe snatched it from my hand, her bravado evaporating as her eyes scanned the first page. The color drained from her face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. I watched her read the lines that confirmed everything I had just said. Her expression, shifting from smug disbelief to dawning, absolute horror. This says the title was transferred 2 years ago. She stammered, looking up at me, her eyes wide with a panic, so pure it was almost beautiful. Precision Holdings. That's right. I finished for her. My voice as cold and hard as steel. The house you thought you sold wasn't legally yours to sell. The buyer you sold it to, Mr. Peterson, was a controlled entity, a senior employee of my firm on a very generous bonus. And the $214,000 you received from that fraudulent sale, it's been marked, tracked, and is now Exhibit A in a federal investigation. My mother's lips trembled. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. All the fight gone from her body, deflated like a cheap balloon. You wouldn't, she whispered. The words, a desperate, pathetic prayer. You wouldn't send your own family to jail. That was the moment I played my final card. The one piece of evidence that was not about law or finance, but about the heart of their betrayal. You forged my name. You stole my home. You mocked me to my face. And you thought I would come back begging for mercy. I took out my phone and pressed play. Their own voices filled the quiet afternoon air, tinny and cruel, through the small speaker. It was the recording from the cafe from a week ago, when they thought their victory was assured. Chloe's voice times. She'll lose everything. Let her cry. She's always been weak. It's about time she learned what the real world is like. My mother's voice, laughing times. She'll come crawling back. Where else would she go? We're all she has. The shock on their faces was absolute. They stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. The sound of their own treachery, so casual and confident, was the one thing they couldn't deny. Silence fell between us, thick and heavy. Only the wind moved, rustling the leaves of the trees that lined the driveway. My driveway. I'm not sending you to jail, I said, my voice low and final as I slid the phone back into my pocket. You already did that yourselves. Every form you signed, every lie you told, every dollar you spent, you built your own prison. I just handed you the key. By evening, the sirens were singing in the distance, their wail growing closer and closer. A mournful song just for them. I didn't stay to watch them being taken away. There was no victory in that. No satisfaction. I didn't need to see their downfall to know I had won. Their judgment was no longer my concern. Instead, I walked calmly past the house they had desecrated and went to the gate of the property next door. The empty lot. There it stood, an exact replica of the house I grew up in. The same design, the same wraparound porch, the same balcony, where I used to watch my father leave for work. But this one was newer, stronger, and completely untouched by their rot. It was the home I had built in secret while they were busy trying to tear the old one down. This was the ultimate symbol of my victory. I didn't just reclaim what was mine. I rebuilt it. Purified of their influence, I unlocked the brand new front door and stepped inside. Breathing in the clean, quiet air. It smelled of fresh paint, new wood, and new beginnings. I wasn't smiling anymore. I didn't need to. Victory isn't always a triumphant shout or a smug grin. Sometimes, it's the quiet peace of a home earned through intellect and resolve. Justice, I realized, doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it is a quiet, meticulously planned thing. Some debts can't be repaid in money. But justice pays with precision. Have you ever had to make a clean break to protect your own peace? Cutting ties isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of survival. Share your story of when you chose precision over poison.